Vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. Vulnerability without boundaries can be desperation. It can be manipulation. It can be oversharing. Vulnerability is not permission to overshare. The intention and the outcome of vulnerability is actually trust and intimacy and connection, whereas the intention, or the outcome rather, because I would not say that oversharing typically has an intention. It's very much an emotional reaction to feeling like you need to earn someone's love. And so the outcome of oversharing is actually distrust. It is disconnection and usually a little judgment. And so how I like to look at it is that when you feel compelled or a compulsion to overshare, ask yourself this: in what way do I feel distrust, disconnection, and judgment in this interaction? Because these ingredients typically has to come from either you or them for you to overshare. Because when you overshare, you come from the place of, I feel like I need to say something more right now, or share something more right now in order to be received, in order to be seen, heard, and understood. It's only when you feel distrust, disconnection, or perhaps a little judgment that oversharing typically takes place. When you feel trust, intimacy, and connection, very often you don't overshare. You might be vulnerable, but you probably won't overshare. And so you might say that vulnerability actually is a more connected experience than oversharing. Typically, oversharing can lead to resentment. You might actually leave the interaction feeling resentment towards yourself first and foremost, because deep down you know that you kind of didn't have any boundaries in place, or you might have had the boundaries, but you overstepped them. And so first and foremost, if you tend to be oversharing, then give yourself some compassion and grace here. I just extend that to you right now, just compassion and grace, because I've been there and it happens. It happens. It especially happens in the early stages of interaction with someone, when you're going from perfectionism, when you're on the journey from perfectionism and overcoming it, to really peeling back the layers of perfectionism, to unraveling and coming back into the essence of the light, the sunflower, and the bloomer that you are, that knows that oversharing is not necessary. So that grace and that compassion is something that you can extend yourself right here, right now, and even after you overshare at any time in the future, if ever again, right? Because that grace and that compassion is necessary for you to essentially come back to a sense of self-trust in yourself, where you can learn or relearn to rather practice vulnerability consciously, with practice and with more discernment. I wanted to offer you this way of looking at it. Picture a pyramid in your mind. And now we're going to look at vulnerability in this way, where at the bottom of the pyramid, you basically have vulnerability within yourself. So you're most likely to be most vulnerable within yourself. So you will be the one that knows ins and out, right? Ins and outs of yourself. Because you, in this body, will have had the experience that no one else have had. You've seen the world through your eyes, even though that the filters on those eyes might have changed during your lifetime. And so you will first and foremost have and get the opportunity to practice vulnerability mostly within yourself. Because you cannot be vulnerable with someone else if you haven't been vulnerable with yourself. Okay? That's first thing. Furthermore, also know that you can only be as vulnerable with yourself as you've been vulnerable with someone else, and you can only be as vulnerable with others as you've been within yourself. So this is a mirror, right? So first and foremost, vulnerability within yourself is the biggest chunk of vulnerability. Then above that in this pyramid is vulnerability with the most trusted person. And you might have such a person in your life, or you might not have. You might have had it in the past and not have it anymore. You might want to open yourself up to having such a person, or you might not want to be in that place right now. And that's okay. That's totally okay. Beyond that is vulnerability with a few trusted people. And then above that, which is even smaller of a chunk of vulnerability, is vulnerability within your personal community. And then above that, even smaller chunk of vulnerability within the wider community. And then lastly, obviously, vulnerability with the world. And so you can kind of see this pyramid, right? And it would make sense, wouldn't it, that you would be most vulnerable within yourself. And then from that point, with the world, would be the smallest chunk of vulnerability. Now, what I see, though, a lot these days with a lot of high performers with perfectionism is this tendency, again, to overshare. So there is no vulnerability pyramid, and there's no discernment as far as whom to share what with and when. And this is essential to get clear on and understand that if you are as vulnerable within yourself as you are with the world, right? If there's no boundaries there, then what tends to happen is that you might lose your sense of center. You might feel ungrounded. You might feel even unsafe at times because everything is being shared. And so I wouldn't say that boundaries are filters. They're not. And I would rather say that boundaries are meant to be bloom boundaries. And bloom boundaries are actually a way of looking at it that you basically believe that boundaries are in place for you to flourish and for others and the world to flourish, to bloom. Without the boundaries there, then you might actually see yourself wilting and falling and the world and everyone else also wilting and falling. So being able to have those boundaries in place is actually for your emotional, spiritual, and mental well-being. These boundaries are not meant to be walls. They're not meant to be there to isolate yourself, because that would basically be armoring up. It's basically just having the ability to see things, see vulnerability as this pyramid, rather than there being no pyramid at all and no boundaries whatsoever. I believe that you can actually have stronger vulnerability with yourself and connection with yourself and connection with others when these boundaries are in place. So open your book of life only to a few people. First with the most trusted person, then few trusted people, then within your personal community and the wider community and the world. So it's essential to go about it in that way. Because in this world, very few care to understand, deeply understand, and want to sit with you in the chapters and see the chapters of your life and the seasons of your life. Others are just curious to know, right? So daring to set bloom boundaries is about having the courage, having the bravery to love yourself, even when you risk disappointing others by not oversharing. So obviously, when you might not overshare anymore, you might be disappointing others because they won't have as much access to you or see straight into you. But you'll also be able to have more discernment, more deeper connection with yourself, and you will learn this very important skill of setting and enforcing and communicating your bloom boundaries, which will allow you to take root, rise, and bloom beyond perfectionism. This and more is what I truly go deep into within the Bloom Beyond Perfectionism program. I actually have a full module on bloom boundaries, which is several hours long, because when did we ever learn what it means to have bloom boundaries in place? I fundamentally believe that bloom boundaries is essential when you take root in yourself as the light sunflower and bloomer that you are, with your core values, living from those values. When you know yourself to that point, it's essential to set up those bloom boundaries around you so that you are more discerning about your time, your energy, the way that you interact with others, whom to interact with, and when. To be able to actually, from that point, rise and bloom. It's so essential. So all of this and more within the Bloom Beyond Perfectionism program, and you can explore and get to know more about the Bloom Beyond Perfectionism program if you come into the Bloom Beyond tribe. So the first step would be to apply to join the Bloom Beyond tribe by going to bloombeyond.com/apply. Send through an application. Let me know your current situation and your desired situation when it comes to, vulnerability, when it comes to boundary setting. If you are oversharing, then this is definitely for you too, because then we'll be able to come back to center, come back to you, so that you can begin to rather get vulnerable in a very different way than you would if you would be oversharing, in a more conscious way, more deliberate way, more discerning way. So go to bloombeyond.com/apply to apply, and I might see you on the other side. Stay bright, brave, and balanced, and keep setting those bloom boundaries.